The wind howled across the Colorado Plateau like a wounded animal, carrying with it the first bitter taste of winter. November 1878 had arrived with teeth bared, and the scattered ranches along the valley floor were already battening down for what promised to be a harsh season. Elias Carter pulled his collar higher against the biting cold as he guided his horse down the rocky trail toward Redemption Creek. The small frontier town sat like a cluster of wooden teeth against the base of the mountains, smoke rising from chimneys in thin, desperate columns. He'd made this supply run 100 times before, but something felt different today. Maybe it was the way the clouds hung low and heavy, pregnant with snow. Or maybe it was just the restlessness that had been gnawing at him since he'd returned from the war. At 28, Elias carried himself with the quiet wariness of a man who'd seen too much. The Union Blue had been folded away years ago, but the memories hadn't been so easily stored. His brother Matthew's laugh still echoed in quiet moments, cut short by Confederate grape shot at Antietam. Now, Elias lived alone in a cabin 5 miles from his father's main ranch house, preferring the solitude to the old man's bitter silences and whiskey-fueled tirades about everything from cattle prices to the government in Washington. The town was busier than usual when he arrived. A stagecoach sat askew in front of the hotel, its passengers milling about in various states of agitation. Elias tied his horse outside Morrison's general store and tried to ignore the commotion, but fragments of conversation drifted to him on the wind. Left her right there at the station. Poor thing came all the way from Boston. What kind of man does that to a woman? Despite himself, Elias found his gaze drawn to the center of the disturbance. A young woman stood beside a modest traveling trunk, her back rigid with what he recognized as the kind of pride that comes when it's all you have left. She wore a dark blue traveling dress that had seen better days, though it was clean and carefully mended. Her auburn hair was pinned up properly, but wisps had escaped to frame a face that might have been pretty, if not for the strain etched into every line. "Miss, you can't just stand here all day," the stagecoach driver was saying, not unkindly. "Storm's coming in, and there ain't another coach for 3 days." "I'm aware of that, sir," the woman replied, her Eastern accent sharp as glass against the rough Western drawl. "I'm simply considering my options." A harsh laugh came from the hotel porch. Jedediah Kane, mine owner and the kind of man who collected power like some men collected gold, leaned against a post with a smile that never reached his eyes. "Options, lady. You got exactly 2 options in a town like this. You can try your luck at the saloon, though I doubt you've got the constitution for that kind of work. Or you can accept charity from the church. Though between you and me, even Pastor Williams might think twice about taking in a bride who couldn't keep her man's interest long enough to make it to the altar." The woman's face flushed, but she held her ground. "Mr. Kane, as I've already explained, our arrangement was terminated by mutual agreement. I have funds enough to what, buy a ticket back east? I think not. Miss Turner, I know exactly how much I sent for your passage. And I know it was one way." Kane straightened, adjusting his expensive coat. "Face facts. You're stuck here same as the rest of us. Only difference is, the rest of us belong here." Elias had heard enough. He'd never liked Kane, with his soft hands and hard eyes. The way he treated people like property to be bought and sold. Before he could think better of it, he was stepping forward. "That's enough. Kane!" Every head turned. Kane's eyes narrowed as he took in Elias's worn coat and work-roughened hands. "Well, if it isn't the Hermit of Pike's Peak. Didn't know you came to town for anything but supplies and silence. Carter." "I come to town for my business," Elias said evenly. "Part of that business is seeing folks treated decent." "Is that so?" Kane's smile widened. "And what's this to you? You're looking to pick up another man's leavings, though I suppose a man who lives alone with his ghosts might not be too particular about—" "Mr. Kane." The woman's voice cut through the tension like a blade. Whatever business you had with me is concluded. I'll thank you to take your leave." Kane's face darkened. "You'll learn soon enough. Miss Turner, this isn't Boston. Out here, a woman alone is just prey waiting to be caught." He tipped his hat mockingly. "I'll be seeing you around, I'm sure." As Kane strode away, his expensive boots clicking on the boardwalk, the crowd began to disperse. The stagecoach driver muttered something about schedules and climbed back to his seat. Within minutes, the street had returned to its normal rhythms, leaving Elias standing awkwardly near the woman who still hadn't moved from her spot beside the trunk. "I didn't need your help," she said without looking at him. "Didn't say you did." She turned then, and he saw that her eyes were gray as the storm clouds overhead. "Then why?" Elias shrugged. "Kane's a bully. Never could abide bullies." Something in her face softened slightly. "Well, thank you, Mr. Carter. Elias Carter. Abigail Turner." She hesitated, then offered her hand like a man would. Her grip was firm despite the fine bones he could feel through her glove. "I suppose you heard the whole sordid story." "Heard enough. None of my business unless you want to make it so." She studied him for a long moment. "You're not what I expected from a Western man, Mr. Carter." "How's that?" "You haven't offered to solve all my problems, proposed marriage, or suggested I'm too delicate for this climate." Despite everything, Elias found himself almost smiling. "Day's still young, Miss Turner." The first snowflakes began to fall, fat and lazy at first. Then, with increasing urgency, Abigail looked up at the darkening sky, and, for the first time, he saw a crack in her composure. "Is there a respectable boarding house in town?" she asked. Mrs. Holloway runs a place, but—" Elias hesitated. "She's particular about her boarders. Single women need references, proof of employment, that sort of thing." "I see." The words came out steady, but her hands tightened on the handle of her trunk. Elias knew he should walk away. He'd done his good deed. Run off Kane, made sure she wasn't being openly harassed. But something about the way she stood there, spine straight against the gathering storm, reminded him of Matthew the night before Antietam, putting on a brave face when they both knew morning might not come. "My cabin's 5 miles north," he heard himself saying. "Got a barn that's warm enough, if you're not too proud for hay and horse blankets. Just till the weather clears and you can make proper arrangements." She turned to look at him fully, searching his face for something. "Why would you offer that?" "Because Kane was right about one thing. Storm's coming. And it's going to be a bad one. Because you look like you've had enough hard luck for one day. And because—" He paused, trying to find words that wouldn't sound foolish. "Because sometimes folks need help, and sometimes we're in a position to give it. Simple as that." "Nothing's ever that simple. Mr. Carter." "Maybe not, but the offer stands." The wind picked up, driving snow sideways now. Somewhere, a shutter banged against a wall. Abigail looked around the nearly empty street, at the windows already being shuttered against the storm, at the hotel where Kane had disappeared, at the church at the far end of town with its doors firmly shut. "Just until the weather clears," she said finally. Just until then. He loaded her trunk onto his horse and they set out, Abigail walking beside him with determined steps despite her thin boots. The storm worsened with each mile, until they were bent nearly double against it. More than once. Elias caught her elbow when she stumbled, and more than once. She pulled away as soon as she found her footing. By the time they reached the cabin, they were both half frozen. Elias fumbled with numb fingers to get the door open, then quickly ushered her inside. The space was simple but clean, one room with a fireplace, a narrow bed in the corner, a table with 2 chairs, shelves lined with books that surprised her. "You read?" she asked through chattering teeth. "When the nights get long," he replied, already moving to start a fire. "Helps keep the quiet from getting too loud." As the flames caught and began to spread warmth through the room, Abigail stood uncertainly by the door, in the flickering light. Elias could see how young she really was, 23, maybe 24 at most. Too young to have that particular weariness in her eyes. "I'll sleep in the barn," he said. "You can bar the door from inside. Nobody'll bother you here. In this weather, you'll freeze." "I've slept in worse. During the war," he cut himself off. "Anyway, I'll be fine." "Mr. Carter." She moved closer to the fire, holding her hands out to the warmth. "I may be from Boston, but I'm not a fool. This cabin is miles from anywhere. You've already shown yourself to be decent, and sending you to sleep in a barn in a blizzard would be poor repayment for kindness." She paused. "If you have blankets enough, you can sleep by the fire. I'll take the corner." It was practical, sensible. It was also completely improper by any standard, east or west. But then, nothing about this day had been proper. "All right," he agreed. "Are you hungry? I've got beans, some salt pork, coffee." Coffee would be wonderful. As he prepared their simple meal, she told him pieces of her story. The widowed mother in Boston, the debts after her father's death, the advertisement in the newspaper for brides willing to travel west, the letters from Kane promising a fine house, a position in society, a new start. "He seemed educated, refined," she said, staring into her coffee cup. "His letters were persuasive. I thought I was being practical, making a sound decision for my future. What happened when you arrived?" Her jaw tightened. "He took one look at me and said I wasn't what he ordered. Too plain, too educated, too likely to have opinions." She gave a bitter laugh. "He said he'd specified a blonde, someone more manageable. As if I were a horse he could send back to the cellar." Elias felt anger kindle in his chest, but kept his voice neutral. "So he just left you at the station?" "With $5 for my trouble and the suggestion that I find work in the saloon. Apparently. That's where women of negotiable virtue belong." She looked up at him then. "I suppose that's what I am now, a woman of negotiable virtue." "No," Elias said firmly. "You're a woman who took a chance that didn't pan out. Nothing more, nothing less." The wind howled outside, rattling the windows. The fire popped and settled, in the warmth and relative safety of the cabin. Some of the tension finally eased from Abigail's shoulders. "Tell me about the books," she said. "I wouldn't have expected to find Shakespeare in a Colorado cabin." "My mother's," Elias admitted. "She was a teacher before she married my father. Brought a trunk of books from Philadelphia. Used to read to us when we were boys, my brother and me. Used to... She died when I was 12. Fever took her one winter." He stared into the fire. "Matthew, my brother, he kept up the reading. Even brought books to war with him. Said it reminded him that there was beauty in the world worth fighting for. Was Antietam, September of '62. "I'm sorry." They sat in silence for a while, listening to the storm. Finally, Abigail rose and moved to her trunk, pulling out a thick blanket. "I came prepared for winter, at least," she said. "Please, take this for your bed by the fire. It's the least I can do." As they prepared for sleep, moving carefully around each other in the small space, Elias found himself thinking how strange it was that this morning he had been alone, expecting nothing more from the day than supplies and solitude. Now there was a woman sleeping in his cabin, a woman with gray eyes and Boston vowels, and courage enough to face down Jedediah Kane. He settled by the fire, listening to her breathing gradually slow and deepen. The storm raged on, but inside the cabin was warmth and, for the first time in longer than he could remember, a sense of possibility. Tomorrow would bring complications, decisions, probably trouble from Kane. But tonight, two strangers had found shelter from the storm, and that was enough. As sleep finally took him, Elias's last thought was that Matthew would have liked her, would have appreciated the steel beneath the silk, the way she'd stood her ground when everything was falling apart around her. And somewhere in the wind's howling, he could almost hear his brother's laughter, warm with approval. The fire burned low, casting dancing shadows on the walls, while outside the Colorado winter claimed the land in white silence. The fire had burned down to glowing embers when Abigail stirred awake. For a moment, she couldn't place where she was the rough wooden walls, the unfamiliar shadows, the sound of breathing that wasn't her own. Then memory crashed back the stagecoach, Cain's cruel dismissal, the storm, and the quiet man who'd offered shelter without asking for anything in return. She lay still, watching the faint orange light play across the ceiling beams. Through the single window, she could see that snow still fell steadily, though the wind had calmed. Dawn was perhaps an hour away, painting the world in shades of gray and white. From his makeshift bed by the hearth, Elias shifted but didn't wake. In sleep, his face had lost some of its guarded quality. He looked younger, though the lines around his eyes spoke of too many early mornings and late-night watches. His dark hair fell across his forehead, and one arm was flung out as if reaching for something or someone no longer there. Abigail rose quietly, wrapping the shawl around her shoulders against the pre-dawn chill. She added a log to the fire, careful not to let it scrape against the stone. The action felt strangely domestic, as if she'd done this 100 times before in this very cabin. As the new wood caught, Elias's eyes opened. For a moment, they just looked at each other across the small space, neither speaking. Then he sat up, running a hand through his hair. "Morning," he said, voice rough with sleep. "How did you rest?" "Better than I expected," she admitted. "The fire kept the worst of the cold at bay. Thank you for that, for all of this." He waved off her gratitude, standing and stretching. "Coffee?" "Please?" They moved around each other with careful politeness, two strangers trying to navigate the forced intimacy of shared space. Elias filled the pot with water from a bucket by the door, while Abigail found cups on a shelf. Everything in the cabin spoke of a solitary life efficiently organized: one plate, one cup, one chair, until he'd dragged another from somewhere last night. "The storm's easing," he observed, looking out the window. "Another few hours, maybe, and it'll blow itself out. Then I should make plans to return to town." The words came out steadier than she felt. "To go where exactly?" His tone was mild, but the question hit home. She didn't answer immediately, busying herself with setting the cups on the table. "I'll find something. Perhaps the pastor you mentioned might know of a family needing help governess work, or housekeeping." "Maybe." Elias poured the coffee, steam rising between them. "Or maybe you could take a day or two to figure things out. No sense rushing into another bad situation. I've imposed enough." "You've imposed nothing." He sat down across from her, cradling his cup. "Truth is, it's been nice, having someone to share coffee with. Been a long time since anyone sat at this table besides me." There was something in his voice, a loneliness that echoed her own. Abigail had been so focused on her own predicament that she hadn't considered this man who lived miles from town, surrounded by books and memories, keeping the world at arm's length. "Tell me about your brother," she said softly. "Matthew. Was it?" Elias's hands tightened on the cup. "What makes you think I want to talk about him?" "You don't have to, but sometimes talking helps the remembering hurt less." He was quiet for so long she thought he wouldn't answer. Then he was 2 years older. Everything came easy to Matt, smiling, laughing, making friends. Pa used to say he could charm birds from the trees. A ghost of a smile crossed his face. He probably could have had this way about him, like the world was a game and he knew all the rules. You loved him very much. Everyone loved Matt, even when we were boys, working the ranch. He'd have us all laughing at something. Could turn the hardest day into an adventure. Elias stared into his coffee. When the war came, he was first to enlist, said it was a grand cause, fighting to keep the Union whole. I followed because I always followed Matt. Abigail waited, letting the silence stretch until he was ready. He died saving my life, Elias said finally. Rebel artillery had us pinned. I was trying to drag a wounded man to cover when the next barrage came in. Matt knocked me down, covered me with his own body, took the shrapnel that was meant for me. His voice dropped to barely above a whisper. Lived just long enough to make some joke about finally being the one to save my hide for a change. I'm so sorry. Pa blamed me, never said it outright, but I could see it in his eyes. Why was I standing there when his golden boy was in the ground? So when I came home, I built this place, close enough to help with the ranch when needed, far enough to avoid the questions nobody wanted to ask. The fire popped, sending sparks up the chimney. Outside, the snow continued its quiet accumulation, transforming the landscape into something clean and anonymous. My father died believing I'd disappointed him, Abigail said quietly. He was a merchant, respectable, cautious. When the crash of '73 took his investments, it broke something in him. He spent his last years trying to rebuild what was lost, making increasingly desperate gambles. She traced the grain of the wooden table with one finger. I was supposed to marry well, you see, restore the family fortune through an advantageous match. Instead, I spent those years nursing him and Mother, watching everything slip away piece by piece. Is that why you answered Kane's advertisement? Mother died 2 months after Father. The creditors took everything: the house, the furniture, even her piano. I had enough for a boarding house room and nothing more. When I saw the advertisement, she shrugged. It seemed like a chance to start over, to be useful to someone. I convinced myself it was practical, but perhaps I was just running away. Nothing wrong with running, Elias said. Sometimes it's the only thing that makes sense. They sat in companionable silence, the coffee cooling between them. The gray light outside grew stronger, revealing a world transformed by snow. The rough edges of the landscape had been softened, made beautiful and dangerous in equal measure. I should see to the animals, Elias said eventually. Storm like this, they'll need extra feed. Let me help. He looked surprised. You don't have to, Mr. Carter Elias. I may be from Boston, but I'm not made of spun glass. I know how to work. He studied her for a moment, then nodded. There's an old coat on the peg by the door. It'll swim on you, but it's warm. They worked side by side in the barn, spreading hay for his 2 horses and the small flock of chickens he kept. Abigail's movements were careful at first, uncertain, but she quickly found a rhythm. When one of the horses, a gentle mare named Bess, nuzzled her shoulder, she laughed, a sound that transformed her face entirely. She likes you, Elias observed. The feeling's mutual. Abigail stroked the mare's neck. We had horses when I was young. I'd forgotten how much I missed them. They were heading back to the cabin when they heard the distant sound of horses approaching. Elias tensed, his hand moving instinctively to where a gun might hang. But he wasn't armed, and the riders were already visible through the snow. 3 men, bundled against the cold. As they drew closer, Elias recognized the lead rider, Samuel Morrison, from the general store, accompanied by 2 others he didn't know well. Carter, Morrison called out, reining in his horse. Glad to see you made it home safe. Hell of a storm. Morrison. Elias nodded, acutely aware of Abigail standing beside him in his oversized coat. What brings you out this way? Morrison's eyes flicked to Abigail, and something in his expression hardened. Heard you had company. Wanted to make sure everything was proper. Since when do you concern yourself with my business? Sam. Since Jedediah Kane made it the town's business. Morrison shifted in his saddle. He's putting it about that you've taken in his runaway bride. Says she's a woman of loose morals who's bewitched you somehow. Abigail stiffened beside him. I am not, nor have I ever been. Mr. Cain's bride. He rejected our arrangement the moment I arrived. That's not how he tells it. One of the other men said, claims you had an understanding, took his money under false pretenses. Then he's lying, Elias said flatly. Miss Turner was abandoned at the station with nowhere to go in a blizzard. I offered temporary shelter, nothing more. Morrison's mouth twisted. That may be, but you know how talk spreads. An unmarried woman staying with an unmarried man. No chaperone. It don't look good. Carter. Not for her, not for you. Then perhaps people should mind their own business. Easy for you to say. You already live like a hermit. But the lady here— Morrison tipped his hat to Abigail with exaggerated courtesy. She might want to think about her reputation. What's left of it. Elias took a step forward, but Abigail's hand on his arm stopped him. Thank you for your concern, Mr. Morrison, she said with icy politeness. I assure you, my reputation is my own affair, as is where I choose to shelter from a storm. Morrison flushed. Just trying to help, miss, but don't say you weren't warned. Cain's got influence in this town. He can make things mighty uncomfortable for those who cross him. Is that a threat? Elias asked quietly. Just a fact. Morrison gathered his reins. Storm's breaking. Expect you'll be bringing the lady back to town soon. Might be best for everyone if that happens sooner rather than later. They watched the riders disappear into the white landscape. When they were gone, Abigail let out a shaky breath. I should go back, she said. Today, before this gets worse. And let Cain win. Elias turned to face her. Let him drive you into the street because of his lies. It's not about winning. It's about survival. You heard Morrison Cain has influence. He can make your life difficult too. My life's already difficult, Elias said. At least now it's difficult for a good reason. She looked at him then. Really looked at him. Standing there in the snow, with stubborn decency written across his features. Why do you care what happens to me? The question hung between them like the snowflakes, delicate and dangerous. Elias found himself thinking of the way she'd laughed with Bess, the understanding in her eyes when he'd talked about Matthew, the straight line of her spine when Morrison had tried to shame her. Because you deserve better than what you've been handed, he said finally. Because Cain needs someone to stand up to him. And because— he struggled for words. Because when you sat at my table this morning, it felt right, like you belonged there. Color rose in her cheeks, and not from the cold. Mr. Carter Elias, you don't know me. I could be everything Cain says and worse. Are you— No. The word came out fierce. No, I'm not. I'm just a woman who made a desperate choice and found it was the wrong one. But that doesn't mean I can stay here, bringing trouble to your door. What if I said the trouble was worth it? They stood there in the snow-muffled quiet, caught between what was proper and what was possible. Inside the cabin, the fire would need tending. The coffee would have gone cold. Simple things that somehow seemed to matter more than all of Morrison's warnings or Cain's lies. Come inside, Elias said finally. We'll warm up, have something to eat. Then we'll figure out what comes next, together. Abigail hesitated, then nodded. As they walked back to the cabin, she slipped her hand into the crook of his arm. It was a small gesture, barely noticeable through the heavy coats, but Elias felt it like a brand. Inside, she helped him out of his snow-covered jacket, hanging it carefully on the peg. Such a simple, domestic action, but it made something tighten in his chest. When was the last time anyone had done such small kindnesses for him? As Abigail built up the fire and Elias prepared a simple breakfast, neither spoke of Morrison's visit or what it meant, but both were aware that something had shifted. The cabin no longer felt like a temporary shelter, but like a refuge precious and precarious in equal measure. Outside, the storm was breaking, revealing a world washed clean and white. But other storms were gathering, and they both knew that what happened next would echo far beyond these four walls. For now, though, There was warmth and coffee and the quiet companionship of two people who'd found something unexpected in each other. And maybe, just maybe, that would be enough to weather whatever came next. 3 days had passed since Morrison's visit, and an uneasy rhythm had settled over the cabin. The snow had stopped falling, but the cold kept its grip on the land, making travel difficult and providing an excuse, however temporary, for Abigail to remain. They moved around each other with careful courtesy, sharing meals and chores, reading by firelight in the evenings, their conversation flowing easier with each passing hour. It was during one of these quiet evenings that Elias found himself talking about things he'd kept buried for years. "My father wasn't always hard," he said, staring into the flames. "When Mother was alive, he laughed more. She had a way of softening his edges, making him see beyond the next season's cattle prices or the ranch's boundaries." Abigail looked up from the book she'd been reading, one of his mother's volumes of poetry. "What was she like?" "Gentle but strong. Like prairie grass, it bends with the wind but never breaks." He smiled at the memory. "She tried to teach us music. Matt and me had this old piano shipped all the way from Philadelphia. Matt took to it naturally. Of course, me, I could never make my fingers do what my mind wanted." "Did she play well?" "Like an angel. Evening times, after supper, she'd play and we'd gather around. Even Pa would stop his grumbling and just listen." His voice grew distant. "After she died, Pa sold the piano, said it was a foolish expense we couldn't afford. But I think the real reason was it hurt too much, hearing that silence where music used to be." Abigail closed the book gently. "My mother played too, not brilliantly, but with feeling. She used to say that music was conversation when words weren't enough." "What happened to her piano?" "Sold to pay debts, like everything else." She traced the book's spine with one finger. "I stood in the doorway watching them carry it out. Such a small thing, really, in the grand scheme of what we lost. But somehow it felt like the end of something, hope, maybe, or the pretense that we could maintain what we'd been." Elias rose and went to a trunk in the corner, one he rarely opened. After a moment's hesitation, he pulled out a small wooden box. "This was Matt's," he said, returning to his chair. "He carved it during one of those endless waiting times between battles. Said he was going to fill it with treasures to bring home." He opened it carefully. Inside were a few photographs, some letters, a pocket watch, and at the bottom, a small harmonica. "He learned to play this around the campfires." Elias continued. "Got pretty good at it, too. Used to joke that if the war didn't work out, he'd become a traveling musician." He held the harmonica up to the light. "Haven't had the heart to play it since." "May I?" Abigail held out her hand. He passed it to her, watching as she examined it carefully. "Do you play?" "A little. My father thought it undignified for a lady, but one of our servants taught me a few songs." She raised it to her lips and played a simple melody, sweet and mournful in the quiet cabin. When she finished, Elias's eyes were bright with unshed tears. "That was Lorena, Matt's favorite. He used to play it when he was thinking of home." "I'm sorry, I didn't mean to—" "No." He shook his head. "No, it's good to hear it again. Like having a piece of him back, just for a moment." She handed the harmonica back, and their fingers brushed in the exchange. Neither pulled away immediately. "Tell me about the war," she said softly. "Not the battles or the glory that newspapers write about. Tell me what it was really like." Elias was quiet for a long time. When he spoke, his voice was low, as if the words were being pulled from some deep place. It was mud and waiting, endless waiting punctuated by moments of pure terror. It was boys crying for their mothers in the dark and letters from home that came too late. He stared at his hands. It was watching your best friend die and not even having time to mourn because the next battle was already upon you. "Is that why you live out here alone, to escape those memories?" "To escape the questions," he corrected. "Everyone wants to know what it was like, but they don't really. They want stories of heroism and righteousness. They don't want to hear about the boy from Georgia I killed who couldn't have been more than 16. They don't want to know that in the dark, wounded rebels and Yankees sound exactly the same. Abigail moved from her chair to sit on the floor near his feet, her skirts pooling around her. It was an oddly intimate gesture, one that would have scandalized proper society. But there was nothing improper in the way she looked up at him, only understanding. "My cousin Edmund went to war," she said. "Came back changed. He'd sit in his mother's parlor, perfectly dressed, perfectly polite, and you could see in his eyes that he wasn't really there. He was still in some field in Virginia, fighting battles that never ended." She paused. "He took his own life 2 years after coming home. Left a note saying he was tired of pretending to be alive when he'd really died at Gettysburg." Elias reached down and touched her shoulder gently. "I'm sorry." "Don't be. You're not pretending. You're here, really here, even with all your ghosts. Sometimes I wonder about that, whether I'm here or just going through the motions, waiting for, I don't know what." "You were waiting for life to find you again," Abigail said quietly. "Maybe it finally has." The words hung between them, weighted with possibility. Elias found himself studying her face in the firelight, the determined set of her jaw, the way her hair caught the golden light, the kindness in her gray eyes that somehow coexisted with her own pain. "Abigail." Her name felt new on his tongue, though he'd said it before. "What are you really running from?" She was quiet for so long he thought she wouldn't answer. Then, a life of slowly suffocating. After Father died, there were offers. Men who saw a desperate woman with good breeding and thought they could acquire me like a piece of furniture. Merchants who wanted a genteel wife to improve their standing. Older men who wanted a nurse for their declining years. Her voice hardened. They all spoke of duty and propriety and what was best for a woman in my position. None of them ever asked what I wanted. What did you want? To matter. To be more than just an ornament or a servant with a marriage certificate. I wanted. She gestured helplessly. I wanted what my parents had before the money troubles. Partnership. Conversation. Someone who saw me as myself, not as a role to be filled. Is that why you answered Kane's advertisement? I convinced myself it was different. A business arrangement. Yes, but one where I'd have purpose. Help build something in a new place. Be valued for my abilities. Not just my pedigree. She laughed bitterly. I was a fool. No, Elias said firmly. You were brave. It takes courage to leave everything behind and venture into the unknown. Or desperation. Sometimes they're the same thing. She turned to look at him fully then, still sitting at his feet like a student before a teacher, though he felt like he was the one learning something vital. Do you ever wonder if we're broken? She asked. You with your ghosts, me with my failures. Maybe that's why we ended up here, in this cabin in the middle of nowhere. Two broken people who don't fit anywhere else. Elias slid from his chair to sit on the floor beside her, his back against the rough wood. Maybe broken things can still be useful. A cracked cup still holds water. A scarred horse can still run. A haunted man can still be kind, she added softly. A discarded woman can still have worth. They sat in silence, shoulders almost touching, watching the fire burn down. Outside, wind rattled the windows, reminding them of the world beyond these walls, a world that would have opinions about them sitting here together, sharing truths in the darkness. I should tell you something, Elias said eventually. About Kane. He doesn't give up easily when he wants something. And for some reason, he seems to want you to suffer for rejecting him. I didn't reject him. He rejected me. Men like Kane don't see it that way. In his mind, you've embarrassed him, made him look foolish. That's not something he'll forget. Are you trying to frighten me into leaving? I'm trying to prepare you for what might come. He has money, influence, men who'll do his bidding for the right price. Abigail straightened her shoulders. I've faced worse than Jedediah Kane's wounded pride. Have you... There are different kinds of violence. Elias, the slow crushing of spirit can be just as brutal as any physical blow. She turned to face him. At least here, I know where I stand. I know who my enemy is. That's more than I had in Boston. He reached out and took her hand. Her fingers were calloused from the work she'd insisted on sharing, but they fit perfectly in his. You're not facing him alone, he said. Whatever comes, we'll handle it together. Why? The question came out almost desperately. Why do you care what happens to me? And don't say it's just about doing what's right. There's more to it than that. Elias looked at their joined hands, searching for words to explain something he didn't fully understand himself. The night you came here, sleeping by my fire, I woke up in the middle of the night and watched you for a while. Not in an improper way, he added hastily. But I realized it was the first time in years that the cabin didn't feel empty, the first time the silence didn't press in on me like a weight. He took a breath. I know we're strangers still. I know this isn't how things are supposed to happen, but when I think about you leaving, going back to town or back east or anywhere that isn't here, it feels like losing something I didn't know I'd been looking for. Abigail's breath caught. Elias. I'm not asking for anything, he said quickly. I know you've had enough of men making demands. I wanted you to know. Whatever you decide, wherever you go, you've already given me something I thought was gone forever. What's that? Hope that the waiting might be over, that there might be something beyond just surviving each day. She squeezed his hand gently. You've given me the same thing, these past days. They've been the first time since Father died that I've felt like myself. Not the desperate woman trying to escape, not the discarded bride, just Abigail. That's all you need to be. They sat together as the fire burned lower, hands clasped, each lost in thoughts of what had been revealed and what might still come. The wooden box with Matt's treasures sat open on the table, the harmonica gleaming in the dying light. Outside, the Colorado night stretched endless and cold, full of dangers and possibilities in equal measure. But inside the cabin, for this moment at least, there was warmth and understanding and the fragile beginning of something neither had dared to name. It would face tests from Cain, from society, from their own fears and past wounds. But tonight, sitting together on the rough wooden floor, it was enough to simply be present with another human being who understood that sometimes the broken pieces could form a new whole, stronger for having been shattered and remade. The clock on the mantel chimed midnight, marking the end of one day and the beginning of another, and still they sat, unwilling to break the spell that had been woven from shared sorrows and tentative hopes, from music remembered and silence that no longer felt empty. Tomorrow would bring its challenges, but tonight they had the fire, the truth, and the first stirrings of a love that neither had sought but both desperately needed. The trip to town became necessary a week after the storm. Supplies were running low, and Elias needed to check on an order at Morrison's store. He'd suggested Abigail stay at the cabin, but she'd insisted on accompanying him. I won't hide, she'd said that morning, pinning her hair with determined fingers. Let them see that I'm not ashamed of accepting help when I needed it. Now, as they rode into Redemption Creek, Elias on his horse and Abigail on Bess, he could feel the weight of watching eyes. Curtains twitched in windows. Women gathered in small groups, their whispers carrying on the cold air. Men lounging outside the saloon straightened, nudging each other and pointing. Steady, Elias murmured, though he wasn't sure if he was talking to Abigail or himself. They tied the horses outside Morrison's, and Elias helped Abigail down. The simple act of his hands on her waist sent the whispers into overdrive. Inside the store, Morrison looked up from his ledger with poorly concealed disapproval. Carter, Miss Turner. The greeting was barely civil. Samuel. Elias nodded. I need to pick up my order. 10 pounds of flour, coffee, beans. I know what you ordered. Morrison's eyes kept flicking to Abigail. Question is, do you want the usual amount or double seeing as you're feeding two now? The implication hung heavy in the air. Abigail stepped forward, her chin raised. Mr. Morrison, if you have something to say, please say it directly. Insinuation is the tool of cowards. Morrison's face reddened. I'm just looking out for the moral standards of our community. Miss, something you might not understand, coming from back east. What I understand, Abigail said evenly, is that gossip is not gospel, and judgment without knowledge is ignorance dressed up as righteousness. Before Morrison could respond, the store door burst open. 3 cowboys from the Double K Ranch swaggered in, bringing with them the smell of whiskey and trouble. Elias recognized the lead man, Tom Brennan, Kane's foreman, a man with a reputation for violence and a loyalty that could be bought. Well, Brennan drawled, his eyes raking over Abigail with insulting thoroughness. If it ain't the runaway bride herself, Mr. Kane's been wondering where you got to. I'm not a runaway anything, Abigail said coldly, and Mr. Kane has no claim on my whereabouts. That's not how he sees it. Brennan moved closer, his hand resting casually on his gun belt. Way he figures, you owe him. Travel expenses, time wasted, embarrassment caused. He's a generous man, though, willing to forget all that if you come have a conversation with him, civilized-like. She's not going anywhere with you. Elias stepped between them. Brennan's smile was all teeth. Don't recall asking you, Hermit, this is between the lady and Mr. Kane. No, Elias said firmly. It's not. Miss Turner is under my protection. Your protection, Brennan laughed, an ugly sound. That what they're calling it now? Tell me, Carter, what's the going rate for protection these days? Elias moved before thought could stop action. His fist connected with Brennan's jaw, sending the foreman stumbling back into a display of canned goods. The other cowboys reached for their guns, but Morrison's voice cracked like a whip. No gunplay in my store. You want to kill each other? Do it in the street like civilized folk. Brennan wiped blood from his mouth, his eyes glittering with anticipation. Happy to oblige. What do you say, Carter? Right here, right now. Winner decides what happens to the lady. She's not a prize to be won, Elias growled. Everything's a prize if you're strong enough to take it. Brennan headed for the door. Unless you're yellow. Wouldn't surprise me. Man who hides from the world probably hides from a fight too. Elias started to follow, but Abigail caught his arm. Don't. This is what they want. You heard him. Kane has an excuse to bring the law into it. There is no law out here except what we make, Elias said grimly. And sometimes that means standing up to men like Brennan. Outside, a crowd was already gathering. Word spread fast in a small town, and the prospect of a fight was better entertainment than most folks saw in a month. Elias shed his coat, noting how Brennan's 2 companions positioned themselves to watch his back. Worried about your friends? Elias asked. They're just here to make sure your little dove doesn't fly away while I'm teaching you manners. Brennan rolled up his sleeves, revealing arms thick with muscle. Been wanting to do this for a while. Carter, Kane just gave me a reason. They circled each other in the muddy street. Brennan moved with the confidence of a man who'd won more fights than he'd lost. But Elias had learned to fight in places where losing meant dying, where Confederate bayonets and Union desperation made every encounter life or death. Brennan struck first, a haymaker that would have ended things if it had connected. Elias slipped aside, his counterpunch catching Brennan in the ribs. The foreman grunted but kept coming, raining blows that Elias blocked or dodged, waiting for his opening. It came when Brennan overextended on a wild swing. Elias stepped inside his guard, driving punches into the man's body with mechanical precision. Each blow was calculated to hurt, to wind, to wear down. This wasn't about anger, it was about sending a message. Brennan staggered back, his breathing labored. You fight dirty, hermit. I fight to win. Elias corrected. Something else the war taught me? They clashed again, trading blows that sent mud flying and drew gasps from the crowd. Brennan was stronger, but Elias was faster, more economical with his movements. When Brennan grabbed him in a bear hug, trying to use his size advantage, Elias brought his knee up hard, then his elbow down on the back of Brennan's neck. The foreman dropped to his knees in the mud, retching. Elias stood over him, fists still clenched. "We done here." Brennan spat blood and tried to rise, but his legs wouldn't cooperate. One of his companions started forward, hand moving toward his gun, but stopped when he found himself looking down the barrel of a rifle. Pastor Williams stood on the boardwalk, the weapon steady in his hands. "I believe Mr. Carter asked a question. Boys, are we done here?" The crowd parted as Jedediah Kane himself appeared, immaculate despite the muddy street, his expensive boots picking their way carefully around the worst of it. "Quite a display, Mr. Carter," he said, his voice carrying that particular tone of a man used to being obeyed. "Though I'm not sure what you think you've accomplished. Brennan's just one man. I have dozens." "Then send them," Elias said, helping Abigail down from the boardwalk where she'd been forced to watch. "Send them all, but know this: she's not alone anymore. And neither am I." Kane's eyes narrowed as he noticed how naturally Abigail moved to Elias's side, how her hand rested on his arm without hesitation. "I see. The hermit's found himself a companion. How touching." His gaze shifted to Abigail. "Tell me, my dear, does he know the whole truth about why you really left Boston, about the scandal that even your mother's death couldn't quite cover up?" Abigail went rigid beside him, her face draining of color. "I don't know what you mean." "Don't you?" Kane smiled coldly. "I make it my business to know about my investments. Did you think a few carefully worded letters would hide the truth about your father's final disgrace, about what really happened to the family fortune?" "That's enough," Elias said. But Abigail stepped forward, her spine straight despite the tremor in her voice. "Yes, Mr. Kane. Let's speak of truth. Let's talk about the promises you made in your letters, the life you offered, the respect you claimed a mail-order bride would receive." Her voice grew stronger. "Let's discuss how you looked at me like livestock at auction and found me wanting, how you offered me $5 and suggested I find work in the saloon. Is that the truth you want to air in public?" The crowd murmured, and Kane's face darkened. "You were not what was advertised." "I was exactly what I claimed to be: a woman seeking honest work and a new start. You were the one trading in false promises." "Speaking of promises," Kane said, his voice dropping dangerously, "I wonder what promises our hermit friend has made you. A warm bed, a roof over your head. And what are you giving him in return, Miss Turner? What coin does a desperate woman have to trade?" The slap echoed across the street like a gunshot. Kane stumbled back, his hand to his cheek, rage twisting his features. "How dare you?" "No," Abigail interrupted, her voice carrying to every ear in the crowd. "How dare you? How dare you reduce every kindness to a transaction, every gesture of humanity to something base and mercenary, Mr. Carter offered me shelter in a storm when you left me with nothing. He's shown me more genuine respect in a week than you showed in 5 minutes. If that makes me a woman of negotiable virtue in your eyes, then so be it. Your opinion of me matters less than the mud on my boots." She turned to address the crowd, many of whom were women who'd been whispering behind fans and gloved hands. "Yes, I'm living at Mr. Carter's cabin. Yes, it's improper by the standards we all learned. But I'll ask you this. What choice did I have, die in the snow to preserve a reputation already tattered by Mr. Kane's rejection? Accept his insulting offer to degrade myself?" Her voice rang clear. "I chose survival. I chose kindness over convention. And if that makes me a pariah in your eyes, then perhaps your standards need examining, not my choices." An older woman near the front, Mrs. Patterson, who ran the boarding house, stepped forward. "You could have come to the church. Girl, sought proper help." With what money? Mrs. Patterson. With what references, mister? Kane made sure everyone knew I was his discarded property the moment I arrived. Would you have taken me in without payment? Without proof of employment? Abigail's laugh was bitter. We both know the answer to that. Elias moved to stand beside her, his hand finding hers in full view of everyone. She stays with me as long as she chooses. Anyone who has a problem with that can take it up with me directly. But know this, the next man who insults her in my presence won't get up from the mud. Kane's face was a study in controlled fury. This isn't over. Carter, you've made an enemy today. I've had enemies before, Elias said calmly. Better men than you. I'm still standing. Kane turned on his heel and strode away, his men helping Brennan to his feet and following. The crowd began to disperse, though the whispers continued. Some looked at Abigail with disgust, others with pity, and just a few with something that might have been understanding. Pastor Williams approached them, his rifle now lowered but still present. He was younger than most expected a pastor to be, with kind eyes that had seen their share of frontier hardship. That was quite a speech, Miss Turner. He said, took courage to speak truth to power like that. Truth seems to be in short supply in this town, Pastor. It often is where money and pride are concerned. He looked between them. I won't pretend to approve of your living arrangement, but I also won't pretend that convention matters more than compassion. If you need anything, either of you, my door is open. It was more than they'd expected and less than they hoped for, but Elias nodded his thanks. They completed their shopping in tense silence, Morrison serving them with clear reluctance, then loaded their supplies on the horses. As they rode out of town, Abigail finally spoke. It'll be worse now. Kane won't let this public humiliation stand. I know. I've brought you nothing but trouble. Elias reached over and caught Bess's reins, bringing both horses to a stop. Look at me. When she did, he saw tears she'd been too proud to shed in town. You brought me back to life, he said simply. Whatever comes next, that's worth more than all the trouble Kane can muster. He knows things, she whispered. About Boston, about my father, things I haven't told you. Then tell me when you're ready. Or don't. It doesn't change anything. How can you say that you don't know? I know enough. I know you're brave and kind and stronger than you think. I know you make my empty cabin feel like a home. I know that when Kane insulted you, I wanted to kill him. And the only thing that stopped me was knowing you'd disapprove. He paused. I know I'm falling in love with you, and that terrifies me more than any threat Kane could make. The tears spilled over then, and she reached for his hand across the space between their horses. Elias, we'll face whatever comes, he said. Together. That's all that matters now. They rode home in silence, hands clasped awkwardly across the gap, while storm clouds gathered on the horizon, both literal and metaphorical. The confrontation in town had drawn battle lines clear as day, but as they created the rise and saw the cabin waiting below, smoke rising from the chimney in a welcoming spiral, both felt the truth of what had been forged in that muddy street. They were no longer two broken people hiding from the world. They were two people choosing to stand together against whatever storms might come, and sometimes, in the harsh reality of frontier life, that was the strongest foundation a love could have. The days following the confrontation in town passed with deceptive peace. Snow fell again, lighter this time, dusting the world in fresh white that covered the muddy tracks and bitter memories. Inside the cabin, Elias and Abigail moved around each other with a new awareness, their confession on the road home hanging between them like a promise yet to be fulfilled. It was evening, and they sat as had become their custom, Elias in his chair, Abigail on the rug near the fire, though tonight she leaned back against his legs as she read aloud from Wordsworth. The domesticity of it made his chest tight with emotions he was still learning to name, though nothing can bring back the hour of splendor in the grass. She read, her voice soft in the firelit room. Of glory in the flower, we will grieve not, rather find strength in what remains behind. Fitting words, Elias said quietly, his hand finding its way to her hair, stroking the auburn strands that caught the light like copper. She tilted her head back to look at him. Do you think that's true, that we can find strength in what remains? I think we already have. She closed the book and turned to face him fully, still sitting at his feet but now with her hands resting on his knees. Elias, I need to tell you about Boston, about what Cain might have discovered. You don't have to. Yes, I do. You stood up for me in town, declared yourself publicly. You have a right to know what you're defending. He covered her hands with his. Tell me then, but know that nothing you say will change how I feel. She took a deep breath. My father's final disgrace wasn't just about bad investments. He was desperate near the end, trying anything to recoup our losses. He became involved with some men who promised quick returns on shipping ventures. It seemed legitimate at first, but she paused, gathering courage. They were smugglers, moving contraband through the port, using father's warehouses and his good name as cover. Elias remained silent, his thumb stroking over her knuckles in encouragement. When the authorities discovered the operation, father was implicated. He swore he didn't know, and I believed him, still believe him, but the evidence was damning. He was days away from arrest when the fever took him. Her voice dropped. Some said it was providence. Others whispered it was poison, that his partners silenced him before he could testify. Either way, he died in disgrace, and the scandal destroyed what little standing we had left. And your mother died of shame as much as illness. I think the whispers, the cut direct from families we'd known for years, it broke her. Tears slipped down her cheeks. After she passed, I discovered father had written letters, hidden in his study, letters that proved his innocence, showed how he'd been manipulated, threatened when he tried to withdraw. But by then it was too late. The damage was done, and no one wanted to hear the truth. Is that why you came west, to escape the scandal? To escape becoming like my mother, dying slowly of other people's judgments? She wiped her tears with the back of her hand. But Cain knows. Somehow. And if he spreads it here. Elias slid from his chair to kneel beside her on the rug, cupping her face in his hands. Listen to me. Your father was a good man caught in bad circumstances. You were a daughter trying to save her family. There's no shame in either of those things. Society disagrees. Then, society is wrong. He kissed her forehead gently. You're the bravest woman I know, Abigail Turner, and I'm honored to stand beside you, scandal and all. She made a sound between a laugh and a sob, leaning into his chest. He held her as she cried, his chin resting on top of her head, feeling the trust in how completely she let herself be vulnerable with him. When her tears finally stopped, she pulled back to look at him. I don't deserve you. Funny, he said, brushing a tear from her cheek. I was thinking the same thing about you. The moment stretched between them, charged with possibility. Slowly, as if magnetized, they leaned toward each other. Their lips met softly at first, tentatively, then with growing warmth as years of loneliness and pain melted away in that simple contact. When they parted, both were breathing unsteadily. Abigail's cheeks were flushed, her eyes bright with something that wasn't tears. Elias, she whispered. I know, he said. I know we should be proper, should wait, should consider what people will say, but I'm tired of shoulds. Abigail, aren't you? Yes. The word came out fierce. Yes, I'm tired of living by rules that bring nothing but misery. Tired of pretending that convention matters more than connection. He kissed her again, deeper this time, and she responded with equal fervor. When he pulled her into his lap, she came willingly, her arms winding around his neck as if she'd found her harbor in a storm. "If you sleep by my fire, you'll never wake up alone again," he murmured against her lips, repeating the promise he'd made days ago. "I meant it then, and I mean it now." "I believe you." She pulled back to look into his eyes. "But Elias, we both know Cain won't let this stand. He's dangerous, and he has resources we don't. Let him come. I've faced worse odds." "Not for someone else. Not with someone else to lose." Her hand touched his cheek. "I couldn't bear it if something happened to you because of me. And I couldn't bear going back to that empty life I had before you walked through my door." He caught her hand, pressing it to his chest where his heart beat strong and sure. "Feel that that's what you brought back to life. That's what's worth fighting for." They sat together on the rug, trading soft kisses and softer words, planning a future that seemed both impossible and inevitable. Outside, the wind whispered secrets to the pines, and snow continued its gentle fall. It was Abigail who finally voiced what they both were thinking. "We could leave, head further west, California maybe, or Oregon, start fresh where no one knows us. Is that what you want to run again?" She considered. "A week ago, I would have said yes, but now—" She looked around the cabin, at the books on the shelves, the life they'd begun to build in this small space. "Now I think I'm tired of running. This feels like home. Elias, you feel like home." "Then we stay. We face whatever comes, and we build something worth defending." He stood, pulling her up with him. "Starting with making this official, will you marry me, Abigail? Not because we have to, not to silence gossips, but because I can't imagine a life without you in it." Her answer was in her kiss, in the way she pressed against him as if trying to merge their souls through sheer will. When they parted, both were laughing through tears. "Is that a yes?" "Yes, you wonderful, stubborn, brave man. Yes, I'll marry you." They were still standing there, holding each other and planning their trip to find a willing preacher, when the sound of horses approaching cut through their joy. Many horses moving fast despite the snow. Elias grabbed his rifle from beside the door, pushing Abigail behind him. "Stay back!" Through the window, they could see riders surrounding the cabin. Not Cain's usual thugs, but men wearing badges, a sheriff's posse from the county seat. "Elias Carter," a voice called out. "This is Sheriff Wade. We need to talk." Elias exchanged a glance with Abigail, seeing his own confusion mirrored in her eyes. He opened the door carefully, rifle lowered but ready. Sheriff Wade was a tall man with graying whiskers and tired eyes. He sat his horse like someone who'd spent more years in the saddle than out of it. "Mr. Carter, sorry to disturb you so late." "What's this about? Sheriff, Jedediah Cain's been shot. He's alive, but barely. Says you did it." The sheriff's eyes flicked to Abigail, visible behind Elias. "Says you and the woman conspired to kill him and steal his money." "That's absurd." Abigail stepped forward. "We've been here all day, together." "That's what you'd say, isn't it?" The sheriff sighed. "Look, I don't necessarily believe Cain. Man's got more enemies than a rattlesnake has scales. But he's also got influence, and he's demanding justice. I need you both to come with me for questioning." "No," Elias said flatly. "Wasn't a request. Son, either you come peaceful, or we do this the hard way. And before you think about that rifle, know that I've got 8 men out here. All decent shots." The sheriff's voice softened slightly. "I heard about what happened in town. I know Cain's been making trouble. Come in, tell your side, and let's sort this out proper." Abigail touched Ellis' arm. "We should go. We have nothing to hide." "You're too trusting," Elias said quietly. "Cain owns half the county. You think we'll get fair treatment?" "Maybe not, but shooting it out with lawmen won't help our cause." She looked at the sheriff. "Will you guarantee our safety, Sheriff Wade? And a fair hearing?" The sheriff nodded. You have my word, and despite what you might think, my word still means something in this county." Elias wanted to refuse, wanted to barricade the door and defend what was his. But Abigail was right. Killing lawmen, even corrupt ones, would only prove Cain's lies. "Let us gather a few things," he said finally. They packed quickly, Abigail insisting on bringing the letters from her father she'd kept hidden in her trunk. Elias tucking Matthew's harmonica into his pocket for reasons he couldn't explain. As they prepared to leave their sanctuary, Abigail suddenly turned and kissed him fiercely. "Whatever happens," she said, "remember that you gave me something to believe in again. Remember that I love you." "We're going to get through this," he promised. "And when we do, we're getting married. Cain, sheriff, or the devil himself won't stop that." They rode out into the snowy night, surrounded by armed men, leaving behind the warm cabin that had become their haven. The fire burned low in the hearth, casting shadows on empty chairs and the book of poetry left open on the floor. Behind them, one of the deputies lingered, and had anyone been watching, they would have seen him slip from his horse and approach the cabin. But the snow was falling harder now, covering tracks and muffling sounds, keeping its secrets as it always had in this hard country where justice and law were often strangers to each other. The future that had seemed so bright moments before now hung in the balance, threatened by lies and the machinations of a powerful man who couldn't bear to be defied. But as Elias and Abigail rode side by side into the uncertain darkness, their hands briefly touched, a reminder that whatever came next, they would face it together. In the distance, a wolf howled lonely, defiant, wild. It seemed to Elias like a battle cry, a promise that some things could never be tamed or broken, no matter how hard the world tried. He squeezed Abigail's hand once before letting go, straightening in his saddle, ready for the fight he knew was coming. The cabin disappeared behind them, swallowed by snow and darkness. But the warmth of what they'd found there burned steady in both their hearts, a fire that no amount of Cain's money or influence could extinguish. The user wants me to write part 6 of the story following the outline. According to the outline, part 6 is titled Bong Dentro Lai Doi Dao Voi Quien Luke Valuat Legiadoi, Shadow's Return, Confronting Power and False Laws. The key elements for this part are: 1. Jedediah Cain appears with servants and fake legal documents, claiming Abigail belongs to him by contract. 2. Social conflict and justice. Western law often favors the rich. Elias and Abigail must fight against a corrupt system. 3. The climax begins to form. Elias decides not to abandon her, even if he has to face the whole town. In part 5, we ended with Elias and Abigail being taken by Sheriff Wade because Cain was shot and blamed them. So part 6 should continue from there, with them dealing with the false accusations and Cain's manipulation of the law. I need to write 2,000 to 2,500 words continuing the story in English, maintaining the Western setting of 1878 Colorado, with appropriate character names and period-appropriate content. The jail in Silverton was a squat building of stone and iron, built to hold the occasional drunk miner or horse thief. It wasn't meant for a woman like Abigail. And Sheriff Wade seemed uncomfortable as he locked her in a cell separate from Elias. "This ain't right," Deputy Carl Hutchins muttered, a young man who'd ridden with them from the cabin. "Miss Turner don't look like no killer to me." "Hush, Carl," Wade said tiredly. "We follow the law, not our feelings." Through the bars separating them, Elias could see Abigail sitting ramrod straight on the narrow cot, her dignity intact despite the indignity of imprisonment. When their eyes met, she managed a small smile that nearly broke his heart. "Cain's playing us," Elias said to the sheriff. "You have to know that. What I know is a powerful man's been shot, and he's named you two as the culprits." Wade hung the keys on a peg by his desk. "His story is you came to his house, demanding money for the lady's services, and shot him when he refused." "We were at the cabin all day," Abigail said firmly. "We haven't been near Cain's property." "Can anyone verify that?" The silence stretched, Who would visit a hermit's cabin in a snowstorm? Their isolation, once a blessing, had become a curse. I want to see the supposed evidence, Elias demanded. And we need a lawyer. Wade laughed bitterly. The only lawyer in 3 counties is Josiah Blackwood, and he's on Kane's payroll. But sure, I'll send word. He moved toward the door. I'll be back in the morning. Try to get some rest. When he was gone, leaving only young Hutchins on guard duty, Elias pressed against the bars facing Abigail's cell. I'm sorry. I should have seen this coming. How could you? We underestimated him. That's all. She moved to her own bars, reaching through to touch his hand. He must have had someone shoot him a graze. Probably, just enough to make it believable. The deputy who stayed behind at the cabin. Elias's jaw tightened as realization dawned. He's probably planting evidence right now. Hutchins shifted uncomfortably at his post. I don't know nothing about that. But you know something, Abigail said gently. I can see it in your face. Deputy Hutchins, you're a good man, aren't you? The kind who became a lawman to help people, not to railroad innocents. The young deputy glanced toward the door, then back at them. Kane's been throwing money around, promised bonuses to any man who helps convict you. Sheriff Wade turned him down flat, but some of the others, he trailed off. Who shot Kane? Elias asked urgently. You must have some idea. I shouldn't be talking to you. Please, Abigail said. We're not asking you to do anything wrong, just to think about what's right. Hutchins was saved from answering by the door slamming open. Jedediah Kane entered, his left arm in a sling, his face pale but triumphant. Behind him came Josiah Blackwood, a thin man with the dead eyes of someone who'd sold his soul so long ago he'd forgotten the price. Well, Kane said, savoring the sight of them behind bars. How the mighty have fallen, or should I say, how the proud have been brought low. Come to gloat, Elias asked coldly. Come to offer a deal. Kane pulled a chair close to Abigail's cell, sitting with obvious relish. You see, Miss Turner, I'm not an unreasonable man. This whole unfortunate situation could be resolved quite easily. Let me guess, Abigail said. I agree to your original proposal and charges disappear. Oh no, my dear, that offer expired when you humiliated me publicly. His eyes glittered with malice. But I might be willing to show mercy if you sign this. Blackwood produced a document, passing it through the bars. Abigail read it, her face paling. This is a confession. It says I seduced Elias into helping me rob you. A small fiction to save your neck. Sign it, testify against Carter, and you'll be free to leave Colorado. Refuse. Kane shrugged. Well, they still hang people here for attempted murder. I won't lie, and I won't betray Elias. Kane leaned forward. You stupid woman. Do you think your Boston scandal won't follow you here? I have letters. Witnesses who'll testify to your father's crimes, your family's disgrace. By the time I'm done, no jury will believe a word you say. Is that what you have? Elias laughed harshly. Gossip and innuendo. Her father was innocent, Kane, and unlike you, Abigail has proof. Kane's eyes narrowed. What proof? Letters, Abigail said quietly. Hidden correspondence that proves my father was coerced, threatened, documents that show how legitimate businessmen were corrupted by criminals who... She stopped, staring at Kane with dawning horror. It was you. You were one of them. The silence in the jail was deafening. Even Blackwood looked surprised. Those shipping ventures. The contraband. Abigail's voice grew stronger. You were part of the Boston ring. That's how you really made your fortune, not from mining. And when my father tried to withdraw... Careful, Kane said softly, dangerously. Slander is also a crime. Truth isn't slander. Abigail gripped the bars. You destroyed my family because my father threatened to expose you. and now you're trying to destroy us for the same reason we threaten your carefully constructed lies." Kane stood abruptly. "You have no proof of these wild accusations." "The letters are in my trunk, the one your deputy is probably searching right now." Abigail smiled coldly. "Did you really think I'd carry them with me? They're hidden where you'll never find them." It was a bluff, Elias realized. The letters were in her trunk. She'd packed them tonight. But Kane didn't know that. An uncertainty flickered across his face. "It doesn't matter," Kane said finally. "Your word against mine, and I have judges, lawyers, witnesses money can buy. What do you have, a broken-down soldier and your own checkered past?" "They have me," a new voice said from the doorway. Pastor Williams entered, followed by Mrs. Patterson from the boarding house and, surprisingly, Samuel Morrison from the general store. Behind them came at least a dozen townspeople, their faces set with determination. "What's this?" Kane demanded. "This is a group of citizens concerned about justice," Williams said calmly. "We've been talking, Mr. Kane, about your business practices, about the promises you've broken, the people you've crushed, and we've decided we've been silent too long." Morrison stepped forward. "I've kept records. Kane, every bribe you've offered, every threat you've made, including the one where you promised to ruin my business if I didn't refuse credit to certain people. And I have 3 girls at my establishment who'll testify to your true character. Mrs. Patterson added, young women you've mistreated, shall we say." Kane's face had gone from pale to flushed. "You're making a mistake, all of you." "No," Williams said. "The mistake was letting you run roughshod over this town for so long. Sheriff Wade, these people are willing to testify that Mr. Carter and Miss Turner have been nothing but decent since she arrived. Moreover, young Ben Talbot just rode in with interesting news." A teenage boy pushed through the crowd. "I was hunting up near Mr. Kane's place today. Saw him clear as day around noon, talking to Tom Brennan. Then Brennan pulled his gun and shot Mr. Kane in the arm. Grazed him on purpose. Looked like—" "The boy's lying," Kane snarled. "I ain't," Ben protested. "Saw Brennan laugh about it after, saying something about teaching folks not to cross Mr. Kane." Sheriff Wade had been silent through all this, but now he moved. "That's a serious accusation, son." "It's the truth. Sheriff, I'll swear to it in court." "This is conspiracy," Kane shouted. "Blackwood, do something." The lawyer spread his hands. "Public opinion is a powerful force. Mr. Kane, perhaps we should reconsider." "You spineless fool." Kane turned on the crowd. "You'll all regret this. I own half this county." "And that's exactly the problem," Williams said. "But ownership and righteousness aren't the same thing, Sheriff. I believe you have enough testimony to release these people and arrest the real criminals." Wade looked from Kane to the crowd of his neighbors, people he'd known for years. "Finally," he nodded. "Carl, get the keys." "This isn't over." Kane backed toward the door as the cells were opened. "You think you've won? I'll bring in territorial marshals, federal judges." "Actually, you won't." A new voice cut through his threats. A distinguished older man in a traveling coat stood in the doorway. A U.S. Marshal's badge glinting on his chest. "Marshal Jeremiah Thornton. I've been investigating certain shipping irregularities that originated in Boston and seem to have followed a particular individual west." Kane went very still. "Interesting thing about telegraph lines," Thornton continued. "They carry news both ways. When I heard about tonight's events, I thought I'd best ride over from Denver, and what do I find but a man I've been tracking for 3 years. "I don't know what you mean," Kane said, but sweat beaded on his forehead. "Then let me refresh your memory. Boston Harbor, 1875. A warehouse fire that destroyed evidence in a smuggling case. 3 witnesses who disappeared before trial, and a certain investor who liquidated his assets and headed west just before warrants were issued." Thornton produced a folded paper. "Mr. Jedediah Kane, also known as Jonathan Kingsley. You're under arrest for smuggling, conspiracy, and murder." Cain made a desperate break for the door, but Elias was faster. His fist connected solidly with Cain's jaw, dropping him to the floor. "That's for Abigail," he said quietly, "and her father." As Cain was hauled to his feet and cuffed, he stared at Abigail with pure hatred. "This isn't finished. I have resources you can't imagine, and I have something you'll never understand." Abigail replied, "People who stand by me because it's right, not because they're paid to." The crowd parted as Cain was led away, Thornton and Wade flanking him. Blackwood scurried after them, already distancing himself from his former client. In the sudden quiet, Elias pulled Abigail into his arms. Not caring who saw, she buried her face in his chest, trembling with delayed reaction. "It's over," he murmured. "You're safe." "We're safe," she corrected, looking up at him. "We did this together." Pastor Williams cleared his throat. "Speaking of together, I believe you two mentioned something about wanting to get married." Laughter rippled through the remaining crowd. Breaking the tension, Mrs. Patterson stepped forward, her stern face softening. "I owe you an apology, Miss Turner. I judged hastily and harshly. My boarding house has a proper room if you need somewhere to stay until the wedding." "That's kind of you," Abigail said. "But I believe I'll return to the cabin tonight. My home is there now." More than one eyebrow raised at that bold statement, but Williams smiled. "How about we make it proper, then I can perform the ceremony right now if you're willing. Nothing fancy, but legal and binding." Elias looked at Abigail, a question in his eyes. She nodded, tears streaming down her face. "Yes," she said. "Oh, yes." And so, in a frontier jail at midnight, surrounded by neighbors who'd found their courage and stood for justice, Elias Carter and Abigail Turner were married. Ben Talbot's mother produced a simple ring from her own hand, insisting Abigail borrow it. Morrison offered his congratulations and a promise of credit at the store. Even young Deputy Hutchins smiled and shook Elias's hand. When Williams pronounced them husband and wife, the kiss they shared held all the promise of their future hard-won, honest, and theirs to build together. As they finally prepared to leave, Marshal Thornton approached them. "That was a brave thing you did, Mrs. Carter, standing up to Cain, keeping those letters. Your father would be proud." "You knew him." "By reputation only, but I know he was trying to do right when they killed him." He tipped his hat. "His daughter finished what he started. That's a fine legacy." Outside, the snow had stopped, and stars shone cold and bright in the clear sky. Elias helped Abigail onto Bess, then mounted his own horse. They had no honeymoon suite, no fancy reception, just a cabin in the woods and a life to build together. But as they rode out of town, their new friends and neighbors calling out good wishes, both felt richer than Jedediah Cain had ever been. They had truth, love, and a community that had remembered its backbone when it mattered most. The road home stretched before them. No longer a path of isolation, but a journey they would make together. And in the distance, their cabin waited. Windows dark, but hearth ready to be rekindled, much like their own hearts had been in the weeks since a desperate woman sought shelter from a storm, and found so much more. The peace lasted exactly 3 days. Elias woke before dawn to the sound of horses approaching fast. He rolled from bed, reaching for his rifle in one smooth motion born from years of soldier's instinct. Beside him, Abigail stirred, instantly alert. "How many?" she whispered. 4, maybe 5. He was already pulling on his boots. "Stay inside." "Like hell." Despite the danger, he almost smiled at her fierce tone. His Boston bride had developed a frontier spine. "At least stay back from the windows." Through the frost-covered glass, he could see riders dismounting in the pre-dawn gloom. Not townspeople, these men moved with the practiced stealth of predators. Tom Brennan's voice carried on the cold air. "Carter, we know you're in there. Come out and we'll make this quick." "Thought you'd be halfway to Mexico by now." "Brennan," Elias called back. "What with being wanted for shooting your own boss and all." "That's a lie that won't stick. Kane's got lawyers working on it. Meanwhile, he's got one last job for me." Brennan's laugh was ugly. "See, he might be in custody, but his money's still good. And there's a nice bonus for whoever brings him your hide." Abigail had retrieved her father's derringer from her trunk, checking its loads with steady hands. "How did they get here so fast? The marshal only took Kane 3 nights ago." "Must have been hiding nearby, waiting." Elias counted ammunition, calculating odds. Kane probably had this as a backup plan. Glass shattered as a rock flew through the window. "Getting impatient out here. Carter, you've got 1 minute to come out, or we burn you out." "You'd burn the woman too," Elias shouted. "What kind of men are you?" "The kind that gets paid," another voice answered. "Besides, accidents happen. Cabin fires are common in winter." Abigail touched his arm. "We can't stay here. They'll do it. They'll burn us out." Elias's mind raced. 5 men, positioned to cover the cabin's exits. The barn was too far to reach safely, but there was another option. "The root cellar," he whispered. "When I give the word, you run for it. The door's hidden under the woodpile out back." "What about you?" "I'll be right behind you." He kissed her quickly, fiercely. "Trust me." "Time's up," Brennan shouted. Elias fired through the broken window, sending the men diving for cover. "Now!" Abigail ran, crouched low. As Elias laid down covering fire, he saw her reach the woodpile, frantically pushing aside split logs to reveal the cellar door. A bullet splintered wood inches from her head, but she didn't flinch, disappearing into the darkness below. Elias backed toward the rear door, still firing. He'd made it halfway when he heard the whoosh of flame. Someone had torched the front of the cabin. Smoke began filling the room as he stumbled outside, running for the cellar as bullets whined past. He'd almost made it when fire erupted along his shoulder. The impact spun him around, and he fell hard, rifle flying from his grasp. Through blurring vision, he saw Brennan approaching. Gun aimed. "Should have minded your own business, hermit." A shot rang out, but it wasn't Brennan's gun. The foreman stumbled, looking down in shock at the spreading red stain on his chest. Behind him stood Abigail, her derringer smoking. "No one hurts my husband," she said coldly, then fired again. Brennan fell, but his men were rallying. Abigail hauled Elias toward the cellar as bullets struck around them. They tumbled down the earthen steps just as the cabin above became fully engulfed in flames. The cellar was small, cramped, but it had what Elias had counted on: a tunnel leading to the barn, dug years ago as an escape route during Indian raids. He leaned heavily on Abigail as they stumbled through the darkness. "You're bleeding badly," she said, her voice tight with fear. "Had worse." It was only partly true. The shoulder burned like hellfire, and he could feel blood soaking his shirt. "Keep moving." They emerged in the barn to find chaos. The fire had spread faster than the remaining outlaws expected, and the horses were panicking. In the confusion, Elias and Abigail managed to saddle Bess and his stallion. "Thunder." "They'll see us if we run," Abigail said. "Not if we give them something else to worry about." Elias, working mostly one-handed, opened all the stalls. "When I fire, you ride hard for town. Don't look back." "I'm not leaving you." "You are if I tell you to." He gripped her hand with his good arm. "Please, Abigail, get help. I'll hold them off." "We go together or not at all." There wasn't time to argue. The outlaws had realized their prey had escaped and were converging on the barn. Elias fired his pistol into the air, sending the loose horses charging out in a thunder of hooves. In the chaos, he and Abigail mounted and rode. They burst from the barn into a scene from hell. The cabin was a pillar of flame against the dark sky. casting dancing shadows across the snow. The outlaws, caught between the stampeding horses and their escaping quarry, fired wildly. Elias felt another bullet graze his leg, but kept his seat beside him. Abigail rode like she'd been born to it, low over Bess's neck. They made the tree line as the sun began to rise, painting the sky the same red as the blood trailing in the snow behind them. Miles from the burning cabin, Elias finally swayed in his saddle. Abigail caught him as he started to fall, guiding both horses to a stop in a sheltered grove. "Let me see," she demanded, helping him to the ground. The shoulder wound was bad, but clean through and through. The leg was just a graze. She used strips torn from her petticoat to bind them, working with the efficiency of someone who'd nursed dying parents. "We need to get you to Doc Harriman," she said. "No, they'll expect that." Elias gritted his teeth as she tightened the bandage. "There's an old mine shack, about 2 miles northeast. We can hole up there. You need proper medical attention." "What I need is to keep you safe." He caught her hand. "You saved my life back there." "You saved mine first, multiple times." She tried to smile, but tears were streaming down her face. "I thought I'd lost you when you fell." "Takes more than Tom Brennan to put me down." He wiped her tears with his good hand. "Though I'm glad you're such a good shot. Father insisted I learn. Said a woman should be able to defend herself." Her voice hardened. "I'm glad I got to use those lessons on the men who destroyed our home." Home. The word hit him harder than any bullet. The cabin where they'd found each other, where they'd built their brief happiness, was gone. His mother's books, Matt's harmonica, Abigail's trunk with her father's letters, all ash now. "We'll rebuild," he said firmly. "Better than before. With what everything we had. We have each other. That's all that matters." He struggled to his feet, leaning on her. "Come on, we need to move before they regroup." The mine shack was barely standing, wind whistling through gaps in the boards, but it was shelter. And more importantly, it was hidden. Abigail made Elias as comfortable as possible while she tended the horses. As the day wore on, Elias drifted in and out of consciousness, fever from his wounds making him delirious. He mumbled about Matthew, about the war, about losing Abigail. She stayed beside him, cooling his face with snow, whispering reassurances. "Don't leave me," he said during one lucid moment. "Never," she promised. "We're bound together now. Remember, for better or worse. Seems like we've had mostly worse so far. Then we're due for some better." Near nightfall, she heard horses approaching. She grabbed Elias's pistol, positioning herself between him and the door, but the voice that called out wasn't an outlaw's. "Oh, Mrs. Carter Elias, it's Sheriff Wade." Relief made her knees weak. "In here, Elias is hurt." Wade entered with Deputy Hutchins and Doc Harriman, the town's grizzled physician. While the doctor worked on Elias, Wade filled them in. "Ben Talbot saw the smoke, rode hard to town. We came as fast as we could." His face was grim. "Found Brennan's body and 2 others. Looks like the rest scattered." "They burned our home," Abigail said quietly. "Everything's gone." "Not everything," Hutchins said. He produced something from his coat, Matt's harmonica, scorched but intact. "Found this in the yard. Thought it might be important." Abigail clutched it to her chest, tears starting fresh. "Thank you." Doc Harriman straightened from examining Elias. "He'll live. Tough as old leather, this one. But he needs rest and proper care. We'll take you back to town." Wade said, "Mrs. Patterson's already preparing a room." "What about Kane's men?" Abigail asked. "Marshal Thornton's put out warrants. They won't get far." Wade's expression softened. "You did good, ma'am. Both of you. Not many could have survived what you went through." As they prepared to leave, Elias roused enough to grip Abigail's hand. "The cabin." "Gone," she said gently. "But we're alive." We'll start over." He managed a weak smile. "Seems like we're good at that." The journey back to town was slow, careful of Elias's injuries. As they created the final rise, Abigail gasped. Lanterns lined the main street, and what looked like half the town was waiting. "What's all this?" Wade asked. Pastor William stepped forward. "We heard what happened. The whole town's been gathering supplies, lumber, tools, furniture. Soon as the weather clears, we're going to help rebuild that cabin." Morrison added, "I've extended credit for whatever you need. No arguments." "Mrs. Patterson bustled up. "And you'll stay with me until it's ready. Proper married couple's room, no charge." Overwhelmed, Abigail looked at the faces around them, some who'd scorned her just days ago, now offering genuine help. "Why?" she whispered. "Because that's what neighbors do," William said simply. "You stood up to Cain for what was right. Now we stand with you." As they were helped into the boarding house, Elias conscious enough to lean heavily on Abigail. She felt something she'd never expected to find in this harsh land community. They'd lost their first home, but gained something perhaps more valuable, a place where they truly belonged. That night, as Elias slept peacefully thanks to Doc Harriman's laudanum, Abigail sat by the window, holding the charred harmonica. Outside, snow began to fall again, but this time it didn't seem threatening. Instead, it felt like a clean slate, covering the violence and ashes with pristine white. She thought of her father, of the letters now lost, of justice served even if the evidence was gone. Cain was finished, his empire crumbling, his men scattered. The threat that had driven them together was ended. But what they'd found in fighting it, love, courage, community that would endure. They would rebuild, not just a cabin but a life, and this time, they wouldn't be building alone. Tomorrow would bring challenges, healing, reconstruction, probably more tests of their bond. But tonight, with her husband safe beside her and a town's support surrounding them, Abigail Turner Carter allowed herself to believe in happy endings. Outside, the snow continued its quiet work of renewal, and somewhere in the distance, a wolf howled, not lonely this time, but calling to its pack, celebrating survival against all odds. Spring arrived like a benediction over the Colorado mountains, melting snow revealing the scarred earth where the cabin once stood. 3 months had passed since that terrible night, and now the whole town had gathered for what Pastor Williams called a proper raising. Elias stood surveying the cleared land, his shoulders still stiff but healed. Beside him, Abigail held the plans they'd drawn together during his convalescence, a larger cabin this time, with real glass windows and a stone foundation that would last generations. "Ready?" Sheriff Wade asked, leading a group of men carrying fresh-cut timber. "More than ready," Elias replied, rolling up his sleeves. The work began at dawn, the community moving with practiced efficiency. Men who'd once eyed Elias with suspicion now worked shoulder to shoulder with him, sharing stories and laughter. Women organized food and water, children ran errands, and by midday, the foundation was complete. "It's amazing," Abigail said to Mrs. Patterson, who was directing the lunch preparations. 3 months ago, half these people wouldn't speak to me." The older woman's face softened. "Sometimes it takes a crisis to remind folks what really matters. You and your husband showed us we'd been letting fear run our lives for too long." Young Ben Talbot ran up, breathless. "Mrs. Carter riders coming from the east. Looks like Marshal Thornton." The work paused as Thornton rode in with 2 companions. He dismounted, removing his hat as he approached Elias and Abigail. "Thought you'd want to know we caught the last of Brennan's gang trying to cross into Mexico." He smiled. "And Cain's trial concluded yesterday. Guilty on all counts. He'll be spending the next 20 years breaking rocks in federal prison." A cheer went up from the gathered townspeople. Justice, so long delayed, had finally been served. "There's more," Thornton continued, producing an envelope. "This came through official channels. Seems the government seized Kane's assets, and there's a reward for information leading to his capture, split between young Ben for his testimony and you folks well, for staying alive long enough to see justice done. Abigail opened the envelope, gasping at the amount. We could rebuild 10 cabins with this. Or one really good one, Elias said, pulling her close. Maybe even get you that piano you mentioned. A piano? Her eyes lit up. Really? Every home needs music. The marshals stayed to help with the raising, working alongside everyone else. As the sun began to sink toward the mountains, the new cabin stood complete, larger, stronger, better than before. But more than just wood and stone had been raised that day. A community had been rebuilt, strengthened by shared purpose. As people began to drift away, promising to return tomorrow to help with the interior work, Elias and Abigail stood before their new home. Someone had already lit a fire in the stone hearth, and warm light spilled from the windows onto the porch they'd added for watching sunsets. Abigail had insisted. "It's perfect," she whispered. "It's missing something," Elias said. From his pocket, he produced Matt's harmonica, cleaned and polished. "This needs to be the first thing to cross the threshold, for luck and for memory." Together, they entered their new home. The main room was spacious, with built-in shelves waiting for books to replace those lost. The kitchen had a proper stove, donated by Morrison's store. And in the corner, a small alcove waited for the piano Elias had secretly already ordered from Denver. "Look," Abigail said, pointing to the mantel where someone had carved words into the wood. "Home is where love lives." "Mrs. Patterson's work," Elias guessed. "She's gone sentimental on us." They stood by the fire, Abigail playing a simple melody on the harmonica while Elias held her outside. The last of the helpers called their good nights, wagon wheels creaking as families headed home. "I've been thinking," Abigail said, setting the harmonica aside, "about what comes next." "Oh." "The town needs a school, a proper one. I could teach, I have the education. And heaven knows these frontier children need learning as much as they need cattle skills." Elias smiled. "I think that's a fine idea, though you might have your hands full soon enough." "What do you mean?" He placed his hand gently on her still flat stomach. "I mean that Doc Harriman's not the only one who notices things. You've been tired lately, turning green at the smell of bacon." Abigail's hand covered his, tears springing to her eyes. "I wasn't sure. I didn't want to hope until we had a proper home to bring a child to." He kissed her softly. "Well, we have that now." They held each other as darkness fell completely, the fire crackling cheerfully in their new hearth. Through the window, stars emerged one by one, no longer cold and distant, but friendly lights watching over their valley. "Do you ever think about how unlikely this all is?" Abigail asked. "A mail-order bride abandoned at the station, a hermit hiding from the world, brought together by a blizzard and kept together by adversity." "I think about it every day," Elias admitted. "And every day I'm grateful for that storm, for your courage in facing it, for everything that led you to my door. Even the parts with Kane, the fire nearly dying. Even those, because they brought us here, to this moment. This home we built not just with our hands, but with our community. This life we're creating together." He touched her stomach again. "This future we're bringing into the world." A knock at the door interrupted them. Pastor William stood on the porch with his wife, holding a large, wrapped bundle. "Sorry to disturb, but we wanted to give you this privately." He handed over the package. "It's from all of us, but especially from those who stood against you at first." Abigail unwrapped it carefully, revealing a beautiful quilt. Each square had been embroidered by a different woman in town, depicting scenes from their story: the cabin in snow, the confrontation in the street, the fire, the raising, and in the center, two figures standing before a hearth with the words, "Love conquers all," stitched below. Oh, Abigail breathed, tracing the delicate work. It's beautiful. Mrs. Patterson organized it. Williams's wife said it was important to stitch the whole story, not just the pretty parts, because it's the hard times that make the good times precious. After the Williams left, Alice and Abigail spread the quilt on their new bed, marveling at each square. It was more than a gift. It was acceptance, apology, and promise all sewn together. We should write to your mother's family, Elias said suddenly. Tell them you're safe, married, happy. Maybe they'd like to visit, meet their grandchild when it comes. Abigail looked surprised. You'd want that after everything. Family's important. And maybe it's time to stop running from the past and start inviting it into our future. The good parts. Anyway. She kissed him then, pouring all her love and gratitude into the gesture. When they parted, both were smiling through tears. I love you, Elias Carter, she said. Thank you for saving me. You saved yourself, he corrected. I just offered shelter from the storm. Everything else, the courage, the strength, the love, that was all you. All us, she insisted. Outside, an owl called. And in the distance, they could hear the faint sound of a fiddle from town, someone celebrating the successful raising. The mountains stood eternal against the star-filled sky. And below them, a new home sheltered a love that had been tested by fire and emerged stronger. Elias wound up Matt's harmonica and played the melody his brother had loved, Lorena, sweet and true in the quiet night. But this time it didn't sound mournful. It sounded like a blessing, a passing of the torch from one generation to the next. What should we name the baby? Abigail asked, her hand resting on her stomach. If it's a boy, Matthew, for continuity. And if it's a girl? Elias thought for a moment. Hope, for what you brought back into my life. Hope Carter. Abigail tested the name. I like it. They prepared for bed in their new home, moving around each other with the easy familiarity of a couple who'd learned to dance together through hardship. The fire burned low, casting gentle shadows on walls built by friends, under a roof raised by community, in a home founded on love. As they lay together under the story quilt, Abigail whispered, I awoke by your fire, and I found home. We both did, Elias replied, holding her close. We both did. The wind sang gently through the pines, no longer threatening but protective. And somewhere in the darkness, a wolf howled not lonely but content, calling to its mate across the miles. In their new cabin, built on ashes but reaching toward hope, Elias and Abigail Carter began the rest of their lives. The frontier would continue to test them. There would be droughts and hard winters, sickness and setbacks. But there would also be children's laughter filling the rooms, students learning in Abigail's schoolhouse, harvests shared with neighbors who'd become family. There would be music from the piano that would arrive from Denver, and stories told by the fire about how love conquered fear and community triumphed over corruption. But all of that was tomorrow's gift. Tonight there was simply peace and warmth, and the quiet breathing of two souls who'd found their way through darkness into light, proving that sometimes the most beautiful endings come from the most difficult beginnings. In the morning, the sun would rise on a new chapter, but for now, they slept, wrapped in love and quilted memories, while the mountains kept their ancient watch and the world turned toward dawn. Thank you so much for listening to this Wild West love story. I hope it touched your heart as much as it touched mine while sharing it with you. I'd love to know where you're listening from. Please leave a comment below and share your thoughts about Elias and Abigail's journey. If you enjoyed this tale of love conquering all in the harsh frontier, please subscribe to Wild West Night. Give this video a like and hit that hype button to help more people discover these stories of courage, romance, and redemption in the Old West. Until next time, partners,